It's such a delight to be here, and I love these introductions because Charlene always takes a deep breath before she does the intros. There's just too many kind of accolades and accomplishments from everybody, but it's such a delight to be here, and again, talking about patronage, young patronage, and how we're kind of driving arts and culture, South Asian arts and culture in the future, both internationally, but I think what I'm really excited about today is to talk about regionally, and particularly the locations or sites of engagement with arts and culture in your different work across India and actually around the world, but thinking about the specific locations. So to dive in, I asked each of you to kind of give a brief introduction of your work, and then we'll kind of go from there. Yeah, and so Samyukta, if we can start with you.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Samyukta. I'm a restaurateur and a food entrepreneur. I work between London, Dubai, and India. And over the last 8 years, I've been able to conceptualize really fun restaurants, namely within the Indian and Asian space, and now Italian. So it's quite interesting to see how food is a vehicle of culture, but also art and design percolate into that world. And I'm most interested to see how people really resonate with that in a context which is, an environment which is just quite sensory. So it's really everything you see, everything you smell, everything you hear, and that for me is very exciting. So thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Nupur, and I'm delighted to be here. As Charlene mentioned, I am the director of ARC Foundation for the Arts in Baroda, and we are working on building an institution that essentially represents the art of Baroda, and we hope to do this by building a publicly accessible collection of artworks and archival materials. And Baroda has had a significant role in the canon of South Asia, and this is and I'm interested in doing this because I truly believe that art has an important role in society, and that people fall in love with stories. And I'm personally really fascinated by the story of Baroda, which is largely living history, with just the first batch of artists coming out of the MS University, still some of them still being around. So it's been quite a privilege to sort of delve into it and work towards creating a public institution, the physical space of which we hope to open in January 2029.
And Jaivir, would you mind?
Hi, I'm Jaivir. I run the Avtar Foundation for the Arts, which has just been launched actually last year in December. So I'll go back a little bit and say why we did it and why we did it in Madras. I mean, our motto is fairly simple: from Madras, for Madras. And the first part that we're concentrating is on the latter, which is for Madras. So we felt that as a city, we have a great cultural heritage of dance, music, cinema, theater. But when it came to the visual arts, particularly painting, conceptual art, sculpture, there was a gap. And that gap was that people didn't have access to look at great quality contemporary Indian art outside of a private home. And what we are doing as a foundation is, rather than have a space, we are trying to activate public spaces, engage other people's spaces, so that people walk in and are able to see what is happening in the larger Indian contemporary art scene. And if 5,000 people walk in and 50 people from that 5,000 go out and visit another gallery, that's the aim. That's what we're looking at doing.
Phenomenal.
Hello. This is like the most serious space I've ever spoken about, Belgaria and Mayurbhanj. We usually talk in like villages and like open courtyards. But hello, my name is Akshata. Thank you so much for being here. A co-owner of the Belgaria Palace and its philanthropic arm, the Mayurbhanj Foundation. My family has been in a part of Orissa called Mayurbhanj for a very, very long time. And we realized that a couple of years ago, my sister and I moved back to India to restore our family ancestral home into a platform for arts and culture, and using that to be a vehicle for sustainable development via tourism, but arts and craft being a main focus.
Amazing. Thank you all. What I'm struck by is how each of your efforts and projects really relate to both personal and kind of collective histories of where you're from, and how you kind of pull those together into your work. So I really want to kind of query with you all this idea of place and location and how it informs the work you're doing, the kinds of projects you show or highlight, and the manner of working. So maybe, Jaivir, we can start with you, because you have this wonderful thing from Madras, for Madras. And you said now you're focusing on for Madras, but I'm curious how you see that eventually shifting to from Madras.
So as I was saying in the introduction and our previous conversation on a one-to-one basis, Padma, there was this gap that we felt about how do we make people in a city which has probably the greatest amount of intellectual engagement that any city in India has to offer. I mean, you walk into a literature festival in Madras and you'll see the sheer number of people that sit through talks from the morning till late in the evening. But they didn't have an opportunity to engage with critical ideas around what is happening in the Indian art space. So what we decided to do was do a couple of things. One was to do a show, which is a curated show. So we didn't want to do a survey show where you're like, oh, look at X or look at Y or look at Z, but give people an idea on how to look. So the easiest thing to do was, for me, was to do a show from my own collection because no loan agreements. So we started off with this idea of portraiture because we were all very familiar with the idea of what a portraiture is, and then we kind of extended it to an idea of what it could be, right? So that was one of the things that we've done. Why we're concentrating on the for Madras bit is that there are lots of people and lots of money to be made on from Madras. There is very little money to be made in for Madras. So we want to do things in the city, right? So great quality art from Madras will always go out, and we've had our masters. But how do we get great quality into the city? And this is a not-for-profit, so that element is there. So we've continue to support a number of programs, including here at the fair, which is Himali Singh Sohen's project, which is opening at Sharjah, then at Tate. And when the fantastic team at the India Art Fair came to me and said, please support this program, I said no initially. And they said, why? It's great, it's Sharjah and it's the Tate. And I said, it could be all the brilliant places in the world, but it's not Madras. And they came back and said, we've had a word with Himali, and she's more than happy that we will show the work in Madras. And so that is what we're trying to do. And ordinarily, that would not have come into Madras if it wasn't for the foundation kind of insisting that support is based on the fact that at some point, please show the work to the people in my city.
I love that. And just, it's hard for us on the screen, on the stage, to see the images behind us, but behind, as people talk, will be some images of their work. Please try and make some connections, audience, as you go along. But Nupur, maybe I'll pass it to you. This idea of a portraiture of a city, of a place, I think fits very nicely also with your work. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how Baroda particularly influences your early programs, thinking about which ones you chose to highlight first.
Yeah, so Baroda actually came quite organically to us as a focus, starting from my parents' journey as collectors, and also the idea of community and having, which I think is very central to the kind of to Baroda as a city in terms of an art hub, So to have access to artists, and I think that's what makes it so significant. So in the 70s and 80s, for instance, for context, this all, I think the linchpin of Baroda being so important is the fact that the MSU, Faculty of Fine Arts at the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University started, I think, in 1949 in the 50s. And that sort of, it has its own history where it was really thought through as an institution and how they could kind of differentiate themselves from the West and as well from Shantiniketan. And but you have artists coming in from Shantiniketan, and many of these artists become teachers, become the kind of brains behind thinking up this institution. And then you, as time progresses in the 70s and 80s, Baroda suddenly becomes like the place of of art discourse with the radicals coming in to make their points in the sense there. And I mention this because I think that sense of community, although you don't have as many artists teaching at the faculty right now, but a lot of them still live there, and there's always a doors open policy. And the idea of community also extends to friendships and influences. So our mandate extends beyond people who lived or studied in Baroda. But some artists are necessarily part of the story, even though they haven't physically lived or practiced in the place. So and that itself somehow, when we started out in the early programs, I used to get a lot of questions about, why Baroda, though? Isn't that limiting? But actually not at all. We're finding it difficult to even cover our bases, and that actually inspires confidence in my desire to tell the story, because it feels so important, and it's been very interesting to build those connections. So if I may, I will extend your question of portraiture as a metaphor. And it almost feels so personal, looking at the archives, looking at the artworks, looking at these histories, and so you're literally building tapestries of history, of their lives, and friendships, and so many of them commenting on each other's works, and that. So it's literally like a living portrait.
That's beautiful. I think we all know the power of seeing a work where we see ourselves reflected, or see others that we know in those stories kind of reflected in that. I was struck by the emphasis on differentiation and the way that Baroda's history was also, tied up in differentiating itself from Shantiniketan. And so maybe one of the themes we'll pull out also is how that continues. How do you work to kind of differentiate yourself from other centers or other institutions? And actually, I think that's a nice tie into Samyukta, because you have restaurants all over the world. How do you make each one distinct and yet kind of deeply grounded in the local?
So I think for us, from an international perspective, you have to look at the way the world looks at India and the way they understand India. And that's something that you don't come to terms with instinctively when you see it, but as someone who's Indian and has thoroughbred roots, you want to sort of showcase the best of your culture. And whether that's, for us it started with our Indian restaurants at Jamava and Bombay Bustle, and I think they were one of the first internationally to do a work of, say, Jayashree Berman, or a younger work of an artist called Nilüfer Suleiman. And just because the cultural context of what India was, or modern India was very important for us to bring forward in an international setting. And then, of course, we're able to take that across with Nipotina, which is right behind me, that has works from Megan Barker and Bridget Riley, and they're all very context-specific. So I think what was very important for us as a company was to take the food, which was culturally appropriated, but also then the culture of its art and design. And I think giving that a sense of place that felt very authentic, and we were able to tell stories through that, is something that we find incredibly important and distinctive also in today's day and age.
Beautiful. I mean, they look amazing. Akshita, if I can pull to you, because I think you also are doing something similar. How do you present a unique history and experience around that? And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about it, but also expand to think how you use partnerships as a way to tell that story, or in new ways. Yes.
With the Bilgaria Palace, our families, when I say old, is you can trace our lineage back to 697 AD. And as a young woman, when I look back at that history, it's mostly men. Now, the one thing about Orissa and Mayurbhanj is it's an indigenous state, so it's a majority tribal populations. And of course, when I'm sitting here in a room like this, talking about when you look out and see yourself, that's extremely important. So something we started doing with the Bilgaria Palace, which is actually a home that was built for foreign dignitaries who came to visit the royal family of Mayurbhanj. So the place has always been used for... the place has always been used in transitions, so people coming in, mostly colonial powers, a lot of Victorian architecture. Does it reflect Kalinga's dynasty in history? I don't think so. So what we were doing was, if you look at it from the outside, it's white, it's very bare, it's a very colonial history tied to a very indigenous state. And of course, I think having the vestiges of princely India, which has always been seen as very static and sepia, And so I don't think what we're trying to do is look at the past as static, but actually be reinvention and interpretation as a patron. So even, for example, food over here plays a main role. I don't know if you can see the Kansa thalis with the terracotta bowls and how we serve Oriya delicacies in a lot more molecular gastronomy for the global world, even though it's situated in a room which has mostly been used for a lot of continental food, for the British mostly being there and living there. Our family never really moved in till a decade ago, and that's when we decided to, in any case, make it what it always was a home for visiting dignitaries to invest in Mayurbhanj. Also, what was important for Belgaria was it was one of the only architectural pieces that was commissioned by women in the family. But even women in princely India, I think patriarchy trumps even any kind of class privilege where women were we just don't know what happened to the women in the family. In this case, when the men are fighting war, the women were trying to make sure the economy was running, and so there was architectural marvels that were coming up to kind of match what they wanted in terms of brand language. So the picture before with the staircase actually has commissioned works by the family in the 1920s, which was kind of a golden era for Bengal art and the Bengal School of Art. And that was Hemendranath Majumdar. But if you look at some of the other pictures, it's actually got a lot more dokra decor commissioned by the family for furniture pieces. Sabai grass being used as a traditional material, but what is its contemporary requirement for people today? So Sabai grass sort of being used as mats and chairs and tables as well. And apart from that, that's the Hemendranath piece I was talking about. A lot of these commissioned pieces were actually not so photo studio as we're used to seeing them, but actually much more intimate portraits of men. This one was interesting because it's in the bedroom of my great-grand-uncle when he's just woken up and has a cigarette in his hand. So, trying to take away how princely India has been looked at as kind of this monolith kind of in black and white and not kind of observed as an academic study for the gray, for the nuances, and kind of like tearing it apart for the complicated layering that had. And I think something important for us was to make sure the outside came in with traditional crafts, but with a much more contemporary spin. There were some images I wanted to add as well, which was basically how we use the three art forms we focus on is Dokra, Sabai Grass, and Mayurbhanj Chhau. Mayurbhanj Chhau was interesting because, again, looking at women and their role as patrons, it was a martial arts dance form that was patronized by the family for over 300 to 500 years, but just for men because it came from the armies that were dancing. And we've actually started patronizing it through an NGO to teach women how to learn Mayurbhanj Chhau. So again, a dance-based art medium, but what does it mean to take it from the past into a much more contemporary retelling?
It's kind of, as you were talking about recontextualizing this kind of colonial or like imperial home, it struck me that in some ways as patrons of tomorrow, part of your job is to think about how we retell the histories or recontextualize the histories through the new works and through new initiatives. And the panel series or the lecture series panels thinking about histories from the global south and as a global majority, as it were. I'm curious, this is an open question, we didn't talk about this in advance, how you see your work as recontextualizing history or recontextualizing locale through your work. And that's a very intellectual and big question, so I throw it out to anybody who wants to ask it.
Shall I go first? So I think it's also interesting that when we look at the global south, there are souths within the global south, right? So when we are talking about decentering here, we're also talking about how we decenter away from Delhi and Bombay. No offense to the lovely people here in Delhi. Because we're looking at these local histories in that sense, or these native histories. And how do we bring those to the front, right? And how do we get the best from the outside in and then contextualize that in a form that is digestible to our population that is there. So these are difficult questions. I don't think there are any easy answers. I mean, honestly, I was here to look for the answers from my fellow panelists, right? And that's what I was asking. Because if the answers are already there, there's no point in having a chat. So that is the thing. How do we decenter it? How do we have these very important bits of Indian art, culture, heritage, which otherwise would get ignored, even in the larger context of the South being centered, right? So there are these multiple layers and palimpsests of history which are there, and how do you kind of slice through them and offer them in a way that is palatable? Because if you try to make it too conceptual or try to make it too traditional, you will not get an audience, right? So, I mean, we have to, as patrons, also think not just about ourselves, not just about what we love or what we'd like to see, but also on how we can get this to a wider audience. And I think that's a constant thing that I'm grappling with. Are we making things too unpalatable? Are we making it too simple? Is it simple or is it simplistic? I mean, these are questions every time we put up a show, every time we have a discussion on what to show, how to show. These are questions which we grapple with. I think sometimes we answer them well, sometimes we fail, but we keep doing it.
It's interesting, this question of who works are for, who we're showing it for, seems also to be a question of kind of our motive, but go ahead.
I think, especially in my kind of work, India, especially because it's so complicated with its traditions and cultures, from an international point of view, almost seems a bit overwhelming. And when you look at it from an outside perspective, there's so much going on. You're not really able to tell discerning from not discerning if you don't have a keen eye or don't know much. So I think even just the art fair, case in point, there's so many art fairs that go on internationally, but people don't know about as much as they should about Indian art, collecting Indian art, who should, patronizing Indian art, because it's a completely different culture. And I think a lot of people are now wanting to learn more about it, but not fast enough, because it takes time and effort to know more. So I feel like my role as a patron of tomorrow is quite interesting, in terms of just appropriating culture internationally, to give it a sense of place, but also for it to resonate with the global Indian that goes abroad and feels incredibly proud to be able to walk into a room that feels like, this is something that we know and we want to put forward. Especially in an international market, aesthetic is everything. And I think what we stand for and how we stand for it and how we communicate that is incredibly important. And not just in the business of brand, but just in the fact that this is how we talk about our culture, not just for people of today, but even how people will remember it tomorrow. And I feel and a restaurant typically is a more commercial space because it gets used fairly often, and if you're able to interact with it in a meaningful way that feels that you resonate with it, perhaps more people would feel like they need to be able to, actually sort of cultivate the right artist, versus in a traditional commercial space, just not patronize an artist and just maybe get a copy or a print or put something up. But you don't realize how sensitive it is, because people are coming to that environment to really, go one step further. And for them, it's quite interesting.
I love it. Okay.
Yeah, I think that actually recontextualizing is quite essential and central to what we're doing, right? Otherwise, we'd be building mausoleums. So even looking at I guess every curatorial proposition is in some sense an act of recontextualizing history and critical theory, and as well, I think building the connections when you're focused on a certain place as an idea or as a geography. I think then you excavate certain connections, and many of them, especially if they're based in some kind of artistic history, are necessarily then curatorial propositions or canonical propositions, if you will. And I guess that's how history's made, because it's of course not ubiquitous. So I guess if we stop recontextualizing and relooking, it would even lose its relevance.
I have a question about architecture, but before we get there, I want to talk first about partnerships. We've talked a little about it with Akshita, but just generally how, kind of building on this question of recontextualizing, how partnerships help you recontextualize something. Akshita, you've talked a little bit about it. Would you like to talk more about one example particularly?
Yeah, I think that, some things that my fellow, panelists have mentioned is storytelling is everything, and brand and aesthetic is everything. I flirted with South Asian history and studying it in college. Something I realized was very soon when people walked in, there was a certain language with which they spoke about a Hemendra Mazumdar painting versus when they looked at Dokra and Sabai. And I think that for us, especially because we're so close to folk and tribal art forms, it's not seen as classical art. It's not seen as technical and as complex with as much of a layered history. As much as people standing there being like, oh my God, this is watercolor and this is Jamini Roy, etc. And I think that's something where, as a New Age patron, maybe you try to bridge those worlds, is being able to be understanding the world of a collector and a curator and a much more nuanced eye, to be able to work in and to work with tribal artists as well and give them the same agency and equity And so I feel like impact has to be at the center of what you do. And through that, for us, partnerships became a vehicle. So, for example, we worked recently to have, I was speaking about the Dokra furniture and Dokra pieces being used as a stylistic choice for our interiors. And then we had Sabyasachi who collaborated on the wallpapers. Or, for example, we did something called Karkhana Chronicles with an international NGO called Purpose, where we did sustainable indigenous tableaus of art forms using handlooms and handicrafts that were kept actually in different palaces all across India for public consumption for the local population. And this was supposed to be a floating exhibit, but COVID. But again, I thought it was interesting that we had an international NGO come in to at least, be able to be a sponsor and a patron for that. Apart from that, we also have an annual arts residency with the Bead Studio in Bhubaneswar, and we chose to do it with a residency in Bhubaneswar itself because for us, again, the question, which Jerry is had as well is like, who's doing this for Orissa? And when you talk about Orissa, Bihar, and a lot of the eastern states in the Indian milieu, even though we have some of the highest natural resources, we're still judged by our GDP. Not by how much is being extracted, but what is left of that state. And I felt like a lot of the artists needed to be at the center of that conversation, but being given that via a partnership, the kind of platform which begets the same kind of conversation and dialogue that you would have at an India Art Fair.
I like this idea of platform. Did you have a...
No, I think any of us who've worked building a foundation or building anything will resonate with the phrase, it takes a village, right? And some of my beautiful villages are here from the Chennai Photo Biennale. So talking about partnerships, that is something which the foundation has done this year with the CPP. And I think, again, bringing it back to Madras, I think we've done something in India which has never been done before. We've shown Sunil Gupta his retrospective of queer art in a government museum in Egmore, in the open. It's an outdoor exhibit which anyone can visit, walk through. And the last time Sunil was shown in the country, he was shut down. And now we have people walking through it, many, many people. I mean, we have thousands of people in the day, children, older people. So the CPB, I think, is a great example of what things can happen when great partnerships are put in place, right? So I think that is important. We need to figure out who's doing great work and then help them make it better, because let's not reinvent the wheel from scratch. I think there's enough good work happening in all our locations, and we need to figure it out and give them the means to do better.
And go ahead. I mean, part of what you bring up also is this idea of, do you make new spaces? Do you find existing spaces that you partner in? How do you navigate between that? And maybe that's actually a nice question to kind of architecture and design, specifically in terms of how you use that to frame conversations or frame experiences. And so, Nupur, maybe I'll start with you about that. New space versus old space, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, so we've actually, in terms of specifically design, we've actually worked with a single architect for our current space who's also building our new space. But what's been really great about that, which also speaks in a way to partnerships and collaborations, is that at this point, we've known each other so closely for so long that even when I was thinking about the vision, so much of it has been thought through together, and because of so we've kind of followed I don't know how unique it is, but certainly very thorough process of visualizing before we kind of unveiled the design last February, which is we started these, which the architect Aniket Bhagwat likes to call workshops, which would be these like intense 1 or 2 day long super days where we do presentations, we each do presentations. And this we started like early 2022, so 2 years before we actually finalized the design. What I think the benefit of this is that somewhere it stops being different. The design and vision at this point are so overlapped, and I'm sure it feeds into I mean, on the practicalities of utilitarian spaces and functional spaces, but also I mean, I think one feeds into the other. So much of design feeds, and also in terms of inspiration. I've visited museum shows. In fact, the Barbican, not this time but last year, was one that we were at that stage of finalizing internal, for the exhibition galleries, internal blocks and volumes. And I was like, let's think of adding some more dynamism to this. How do they kind of fall into each other? Let's think about volumes. So space has so much to do with experience, and then of course taking inspiration from local things. I think that there's a nod to Kism somewhere in there in the architecture, and I think, well, in my context, a museum or an institution, I think that the building is an important part of it. Becomes the facade. It becomes the sort of visual logo. So this is actually a recent photo from our last workshop, which is actually just an architectural model of the forthcoming space. I don't know if I fully answered your question.
No, it's an ongoing question, and it was in part motivated by Javier, your some photos from the Chennai Photo Festival, which you took some photography outside, which I thought was quite interesting, right?
So what we've done is that we've taken a conscious decision not to be in our own space, but to be in other people's spaces. Because this goes back, if I have a minute, to a story years ago, and I'd sent a young friend, to a gallery and said, please go look at the show, I think you'll really enjoy it. And then I texted them a couple of days later, said, did you go? Said, oh, I went, but the door was locked and I didn't feel like ringing the bell, so I just turned around and walked away. Right? So what we want to do is we want to remove the doorbell. Right? So the moment you have a space of your own, there is a concept of a doorbell. So when we did our first show, we did it at the Alliance Francaise. And the reason we did it at the Alliance Francaise was because we were in young people's space. They had an ownership of that space. Right? So they walked in and said, what are you doing here? Right? Rather than us trying to kind of create this environment and then welcoming them in. So this is a very interesting conversation. Nupur is building a building. I don't have the budget to build a building, much as I would like to. Or not, I don't know. But these are the concepts. We want to activate public spaces. The same thing is what we've done with Sunil Gupta at the museum. We've shown Manisha Gera Beswani's photographic project she's for 25 years, I think it's the greatest living archive of photographs of artists in their studio. And we showed that physically in Raw Mango in the garden. So the aesthetics of it worked really well. We had a spatial designer, dear friends Justine and Deepak, who did the most beautiful design where you can walk through the space. So you're in these studios, but you're also in nature, right? And the way the shadows and the light falls. So these are interesting experiments of design and art, and how do we make these spaces welcoming to people who would not ordinarily visit such a space. See, for me, that is important. My audience, as lovely as all of you are, this is not my audience, right? My audience are people who would not come to a fair, who would not go to a museum. And how do we make them come into a space which engages them?
It's on? Yeah. I think I was going to add to that saying, the family had done a lot of restorative practices before independence. And the British that was one thing, they could document everything really well, at least what they wanted to. But we had a lot of archaeology. We had an archaeology department. And Odisha's oldest museum is in Mayurbhanj. And was given to the government. And every year I used to petition the government saying, let's open it up and let's do something. We'll get the sponsors, everything. I think people here who have done something in the art world might be familiar with the ways things go with the government. And then I was like, okay, but the only way we can showcase Mayurbhanj and Baripada again as a cultural capital, because a lot of these places like Baroda, Mysore, a number of places, many places in Bihar were actually cradles of civilization. And in the modern amalgamation of vocabulary, they don't exist as spaces of art and culture in a much more imaginative retelling. And so, and then, for a long time, we were like, okay, when we can, we'll build a museum, and, when there's funds or when there's a bigger conglomeration. And recently, there's an architect and designer we're working with, Swaroop Datta, from the East. And he said, but why do you need a space to then be like, now we are worthy of art? And this is where this space now makes you someone who can say that, we have the art and the artifacts, etc. And then what we realized was most people's curiosity of these, sort of mansions that exist. This area used to actually be called Jungle Mahal. Anyone who's familiar with the historical Red Corridor retelling of India, right? And there was a reason for this, because it was part of the Red Corridor. It fell under the Red Corridor when it was communism, and then you had these Victorian homes. And we realized that most people's fascination was just by what was inside the home the way it was. And so there's one picture that I've put up here. All this is extremely product shots, right? We had a photographer come in when we were opening up the hotel and having these shots. And he walked into a room, I'm not sure how, which was the only room that's not been restored. And he was like, oh, this is the shot. And I was like, no one's seeing this room. Because it's like, your grandmother's cupboard. It's like everything stacked on top of each other. And he was like, oh, that is the room. That's still a decent shot is what he got. But what was interesting was he was like, this was furniture stacked up from like 3 different centuries. It was personal stories. And then we kind of realized that, homes like this exist as natural museums. They exist as intangible and tangible heritage coinciding. There's a way to, when we're describing Pathachitra and it's a tour group that's walking through, it's like from my grandmother's wedding when this sort of artisan cluster made this for her. Or, for example, when it's, who welded this dokra, and there's a personal history attached to that piece. And then you kind of realize that, like, when you talk about architecture and design and spaces, if we had opened up a white cube space and showcased art there, like, similar to Javier, we wouldn't have anyone walking in there. It's not a space that they would feel comfortable with. And I think there's some people here who visited Mayurbhanj with me, and when I said this is the most serious place I've had this conversation, is because in the 5 years that since we've opened up the home, we take groups of guests on actual tours of exploring craft villages. And we do it in a way where it's not like you walk past and you're kind of like, this is the home and this is this. And it's not like, it's actually we work with the local villagers and self-help groups, and actually they plan the whole thing. So as we're walking past, they're like, I'll do this, and then you go there and showcase it to them. I'm the tour guide. This is everything what they want and how they want it presented. And I think that was really interesting for us, is to flip the script. And actually, for me, not being someone who studied art and having a museum or being a curator, actually being able to understand that, like, 1, you don't know everything, and 2, listen, if you really want to put equity at the heart of it, listen to the agency, someone else comes in with and how they'd like to be showcased. And I felt what they liked was they were proud of their villages and they were proud of their courtyards and open spaces which told generational stories. And they wanted you to understand how the art was made to respect it. And I think that's, again, another way that India needs to look at how we are making art more inclusive, is by thinking of spaces that you hold these conversations in.
I think that's so beautiful. And I think if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, we'd be talking about destinations. How do you frame Orissa as a destination, or how do you frame Varod? But it seems actually now it's switching. How do you celebrate what's happening there? How do you engage what's happening there? How do you let that tell its own stories? How do you bring the community into a celebration of its own art and share that with whoever wants to come? But it's kind of more localized. So I think that's a really interesting shift. So I wonder if, again, your practice is a little different because it's so transnational and global, but again, experience and how you draw somebody in is so vital to it. So I'd love to hear about that.
I think it's transitional, but also transient, because a restaurant, people come in for, say, 2 hours and then they leave. But for us, what was really interesting is to look at India as a whole in its different growth patterns. For example, Jamava, as an older brand, our first brand, was very much royal India, very palatial, very much laid into Indian craft. So there's Tarkashi, there's Bidri, there's Tekri, there's things that you'd find that's craft laden, and it's very intricate. But yet, conversely, there's Bombay Bustle, which is a lot more fun, which sort of inspired by Art Deco influences in Mumbai, a city that I grew up in, and yet very much celebrates regional food. So I think really looking at India in a larger perspective is also quite interesting, because it's not just the dialogues within, but it's also the dialogues beyond, because just given the fact that tourism in the country is growing, people want to come and see things like what Akshita was saying, restored homes and palaces and cities. They want that flavor, they want that culture, and they don't get it and sparingly seen internationally, which restaurants like mine then become a vehicle for. And if they feel authentic and artisanal, it gives us a better overview when they actually come to India and see what that's like. But at the same breath, what Jayaveer's doing, just the contemporary space, is equally interesting. And there's so many people that come in, and we see that with our younger food brands that are just cool and fun and chic, and people want to see a contemporary India. And sometimes they don't know how to associate with it, or they don't know the language in which to associate with it. And so vehicles like this are really interesting, because obviously everyone thinks of India's regal past and royal history, but I think the contemporary angle is equally important, and if not more relevant, almost. you know?
We don't want elephants. Elephants are nice, but you know what I mean.
No, but it's just interesting to just see the way people respond to it. You know, even though way that international collectors are now looking at Indian art and what's noteworthy or what's something that they can really hone and grow. The conversation just isn't that India is the land of snake charmers anymore.
No, absolutely.
And that's quite fascinating to me.
And what you do is fantastic, because for most people who have not visited the country but eat Indian food, walking into one of her restaurants is immersive experience into the craft, the culture, and the art. And maybe a few of them eventually be like, oh, the food's great, I must go visit. And I think that's what we're all trying to achieve, right? Making people take that next step.
Zendaya and Tom Holland, right before they came to India. They were like, we're going to go try this. And actually they came back right after that trip, and they're like, oh, this is great. So I think it works out. It's actually both ways, right? It's always both ways. I mean, one's a stimulus and one's a response, and right way around. So there's no way of telling.
I mean, I think that's beautiful, and so we have about 10 minutes left, and so to kind of round it off, I'm struck by this idea that you've tasted something and there's a memory of it that both kind of is an important and also draws you to kind of keep going. So maybe each of you can take a moment to think about, like, what memory you want them to have of the work, like in 10 years, 15 years. It's a funny question, I realize it. But at our own museum, I spend a lot of time thinking curatorial strategies, like, in 10 years, maybe you won't remember which show you saw, but you might remember the kind of feeling you had around it. So, again,
I could go first.
Yeah, go for it.
So food actually is one of the most nostalgic things, I think, in the world, because you're always thinking of, oh, this doesn't taste like my grandmother's, I don't know, dal or, curry or things that you grew up with. So I think nostalgia is a huge and important part of what we do, especially. But also, I think it's not just where people go and what they see, but it's how you make them feel. And for me, Indian hospitality is something that, being a third-generation hospitality baby, I'm able to take to the world, not just with our Indian brands, but also now the non-Indian brands, whether it's Chinese or Japanese, Thai and Italian, and that sense of warmth and that sense of just being personal, it just goes beyond just art and space, but just a feeling. And I think that's a really important part, and nostalgia plays a huge role in it. So,
Actually, before I talk about art, I wanted to say one thing. Your conversation reminded me of when I was studying in Berkeley and in the U.S. And it would be, and somehow you just feel nostalgic for Indian food, but it'd be really hard to find good Indian food. You just have the same chicken tikka masala, and then I think authenticity is important. With memory, which is actually why one feels nostalgic for food, and similarly with art, I would in the early days, because I haven't studied art or anything, but when Sousa is one of my favorite artists, and I would say something that when I look at a Sousa work, it has the same affect as reading Émile Zola, who's a French writer. And I studied him, read him years ago, so I actually don't remember the story, but you remember the affect or the memory. And similarly with exhibitions, there's something my friends and I often talk about, that there are certain shows that it's, and we see so much art, it's hard to remember specifically, but there are certain shows that move you, and I think it's when an exhibition perhaps has a sense of time or a place or movement as a whole, rather than just like putting works and so there is a certain differentiator, certainly, and I think that like memory or nostalgia, it's quite abstract, and it's kind of that's like how certain artworks grow on you, and certain ones just like kind of get boring after a little while.
I think Nupur said it all, but that's the whole point. I mean, taking out from what she said earlier, volume, right? So the way we try to design a show is that even if you don't remember a work, you remember the feeling of having looked at the work, right? So the way you do that is through great spatial design. The way you do that is through giving the viewer an experience of the work as much as you possibly can, which is why with the CPB we've consciously avoided white cube spaces, right? So even if you don't remember that particular Sunil that spoke to you, you will remember taking that curve in to look at the work, right? So things like that. I think spatial design is very important when it comes to great exhibition. As Nupur said, we, especially all of us in this room, art constantly, and sometimes all we remember is how we entered an exhibition or how we exited it, right? Or what was there, what did it smell like, what did it feel like, right? A young artist had put up this fantastic show of photographs of the Chandrayaan, which is our Indian moon mission. And he had, and if you've asked me for the life of me, I remember only 2 of the photographs, and he'll kill me, he's here, that was 2 weeks ago. But I remember the fact that he had created the haze by putting in a smoke machine, which may sound very gimmicky, but I remember it, right? So these are certain things in memory is very tricky. So how do you trigger that little bit that stays on? I mean, that's the challenge of a great exhibition design.
And I would just add that it's sometimes also the conversation you had, the person you saw it with, and all of those things. So I don't know if actually, if you want to talk about what kind of memories do you want people to hold of your places?
Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying something, which is a bit macabre, but we do a lot of research and development and monitoring and evaluation, and we had these PhD academics come in to look at climate and how it was affecting heritage buildings, and they said, your building's not going to last. It's been there for 200 years, but Orissa is in a great place of a cocktail of natural disasters. So we have like regular cyclones and a bunch of things, and we have to shut down the place every 3 months just for restoration. It's kind of like making a mandala, right? And a lot of the arts we work with, dokra, sabai grass, of course, is a grass that's grown across Mayurbhanj, but there is climate, and that's changing our agriculture as well. And Mayurbhanj Chao, like I mentioned, it's a dying art craft. It was similar to what samurais practiced, right? It was a way, or for example, like capoeira. Mayurbhanj was, I have to always explain the art forms, right? Like as soon as to give you all context. But Mayurbhanj Chao is basically, it was banned when a gentry of the marital forces were banned after 1857. The tribal people, to just stay fit, would practice would just try to be physically fit. And when the British were like, you can't like take up swords, and they'd be like, no, we're doing a folk dance. That's Chao. So, a lot of these arts and forms, arts classified as dying. That just means that they don't have enough consumers or people practicing, right? So I want to start off with that, because when you ask, like, what do you have people remember? I think for us, we realized when we focused at some things like this, because of course there are a lot of contemporary artists who are also from Mayurbhanj. And just them being indigenous doesn't mean they're indigenous artists. They're contemporary artists who are from Mayurbhanj, and that's brilliant in their storytelling. But for us, I feel we realized that these art forms became our intangible history. It's how we remember ourselves as being, maritime traders and warriors and fighters, or having, for example, the role of women in so many of these arts and crafts. Because today, a farmer is seen as, the man, not the fact that 90% of the duties of agriculture happens through women. So I think for us, a memory that I would like maybe 10 years later is, if this home doesn't last, if this community doesn't exist, if rivers change their course, you remember the story of a community and a person. And I think if we do that, and you can remember Mayurbhanj and what it stands for and its people, I think that's what the art is the medium of doing,
That's really beautiful. I like that. And you also said something that really struck me, which is, you're like, I'm always having to contextualize, I'm always having to explain. And I think that's also part of regional, that's very much what this conversation, I think the panel is about, right? The ways in which we constantly are having to recontextualize, explain. And what's nice about each of your work is you're doing that, you keep doing that. There's a kind of, constant effort. But you're also finding ways that it's legible to those in the community, so you're not constantly explaining. And I'm struck also by the link back to this idea of authenticity. As you talk about restaurants, right? And now, actually, if you go to Bay Area, there's a lot of different regionally distinct South Asian restaurants, and I think there's a certain authenticity to that distinction, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a closing thought, open question about this idea of when do you feel like you have to explain, and when do you feel it's actually best not to explain anything, and let that kind of sit there.
Actually, a little bit distracted by something that I really wanted to say, which is about authenticity and the restaurants. I have a friend, Nihal Faisal, who's an artist, and there's an archival series that he's done, which is called The Real Taste of India, which is basically Yelp reviews from various Real Taste of India restaurants. And then so it's a whole body of work, but the sort of art part of it is he took these sanitized white plates, and there's I think 4 or 5 of them, and they actually have Yelp reviews from some of them that are big, like the mutton was dry and the waiter's attitude was really bland, or the mutton was hard to swallow. This is not the real taste of India. This is the taste of lukewarm, inedible things and stuff.
That's funny. But, I mean, if you also go back to see Subodh's works, when you see them and the way that he does his whole installation, and I was in Italy, actually, and I walked in to this beautiful hotel, and suddenly there was this massive installation, and then it would be Subodh there actually doing, a performance, and you're thinking, like, this is amazing, but it is food as a form of memory and nostalgia and culture, and I think it's funny that we don't realize how important that is, or give it that much importance, maybe because it's something we do every day. We eat every single day. But when we realize that the way we eat, what we eat, how we eat, the manner in which we're eating those things are very much part of the cultural context that we grew up in. Especially for me, I'm a third-generation hospitality baby, but I also grew up with a very nationalist sentiment. My grandfather was in the army, then went on to his textile traditions, and then went on to building hospitality. So very much rooted in this idea of India from, grassroots India until now. And I think it's just incredible to see how it changes. And what's been quite consistent is the recipes that have been passed down, the manner in which we serve, which is what you were saying, your family traditions are very much with us every single day. So I think that's really important and exciting.
But can I come into the question you asked, because I think this is something I grapple with. The emotional labor of contextualizing constantly, right? It's a lot of emotional labor, right? Because you need to do this on a very regular basis and start off with where you're located. I think you more so than I, right? Mayurbhanj. First of all, you need to be like, it's Orissa. Then you need to explain where Orissa is. And then you need to explain where in Orissa. So it's something I grapple with. Do we just be something as simple as Google it, right? Or do you educate the curious? Do you draw a line? I don't know what to do, right? It's just if I find a general sense of curiosity, I try to indulge it as much as I possibly can. But otherwise, I think I've given up, right? I mean, there's enough information available, right? It's all there. You have a question in the particular, I'm happy to engage with you. You have a question in the general, Google it.
Akshita, do you have a final comment to that?
Yeah, I think, I think I grew up, and again, I'm trying, in my head, I'm like, how do I explain this now? But my mother's from Jaisalmer, Rajasthan. My father's from Mayurbhanj, Orissa. Both my grandmothers are from Nepal. I grew up in Calcutta. So I was never, enough. I wasn't Bengali enough for Calcutta. I wasn't Rajput enough for Rajasthan. I wasn't Oriya enough. So while I was getting dressed, just to give you an example of what code switching happens within India itself, I was like, I'm coming to India Art Fair, so I'll wear bodice. I'm going to dress like this, and we're going to speak here. And I entered, and I was like, no, people from Orissa are going to see this panel. Am I looking Oriya enough? So I was like texting the Oriya curators here, being like, do you have anything from Orissa I can borrow? They're like, we have hairpins from the Bonda tribe. I was like, let's try to fit it in. Because you're constantly like, I'm speaking English, and in my head I'm like, am I getting all the details right for everyone I'm actually speaking for? Because I'm just here, terrible cold, but I'm just here speaking on behalf of a lot of artists, right? I'm not the artist. I didn't make this house. I didn't build the Dokra. I'm not, so who am I here? What is my role here? So just to give you a sense of the complication of a brain of someone who has to constantly, it's like, and the other thing is, when you come from a family with a legacy like this, you're like, is it my responsibility and duty to have that labor? It actually shouldn't be labor. It should be a privilege for you. Because you've also been able to, I have a heritage hotel that was, built with a very storied legacy. And does that mean that now it is something that I should be able to do with ease and with a lot of gratitude that I have that role in that space in life? So I feel like, yes, it's emotional labor, but I don't know if I look at it that way. But I think I realized I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy being maybe, I don't know how many of you all know of Mayurbhanj and Orissa. So someone walks away and they're like, I've discovered more about Orissa through your profile. Like, actually it brings me a lot of joy. But I think that's because of a complicated history with the region. And so you're constantly looking at identity and identity politics and, who you're speaking about and who you're speaking to, and the agency. A little more complicated than you asked.
So I was thinking about it when my fellow panelists were talking, and in my context, because the mandate is literally to tell and preserve the story of Baroda, or the history of Baroda. So it seems to me like it is important to explain, because we want us collective stories to live on. But I think there is a thing. There is a point of over-explaining where it becomes a little preachy or boring, or so perhaps what we were saying about memory earlier, like when you're able to explain something because you want to share the story, or that's the job. Like, for instance, Samyukta's restaurants, it's always nice when there's a little context of like recipes or spices, or so it's part of it. But you kind of don't want to sit and read a textbook or be in a very kind of sordid environment where it's
like
boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a fine line.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's such an interesting part about, I mean, we began this conversation by place and kind of regional centers outside of Mumbai and Delhi, and how we create art centers in these kind of more diverse and kind of alternative settings. And so it's interesting to think that that's always hyper-localized. There's always kind of regional contextualization, but I like this idea that there's also a lot of switching that happens, right? There's ways in which you can see different locales as equally international or hyper-local, and same in a restaurant, right? You're both connected to something very specific, the food of that moment, but a kind of network of experiences and tastes as well, right? And so, again, I'll kind of close there, but it's been just such a delight to talk with all of you, hear about the work you're doing. I hope it inspires you to learn more and to get more involved. But I will end there. Thank you all.